All right. Calling to order this meeting of the City of Petaluma's Climate Action Commission here on Thursday, May 11th. Could we start with a roll call, please?
Baker,
Present.
Bartholomew,
Present.
Edminster, Garty,
Present.
Orrit,
Here.
Peters,
Here.
Fong, Hudson, Shribs.
Here. Thank you. Now is the time on the agenda for general public comment for items that are not on the agenda.
Click on that and then drag it all over to the left.
Do we check the phone lines for public comment, general public comment? No? Okay. Not seeing anybody rise up, nor any speaker slips being identified. Okay.
Do I get called up by name?
Yes. But come on up.
There you go, man. I'm sorry, I thought you guys were gonna be called. A little warm in here, isn't it? I would get ready for the cold weather if it came in.
Yeah. Thanks, Shelley.
I'm Kurt Schroeder. I'm a school teacher, retired, taught for over 25 years, science primarily, specifically in geology, and I did my dissertation on the Ice Age. I did my work through Sonoma State and also University of Liverpool. What I'd like to comment on is that no one believes in climate change more than me. No one in this city believes in climate change more than me. But I know one thing, that I have some questions about what's causing it. Since my dissertation was on the Ice Age, I'd like to just mention about one of the problems about some of these issues. Carbon dioxide. Does anyone know how much carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere? Anyone know? How much?
0.03%.
Good, John. I ask that question everywhere I go, and I get like 50%, 25%, 10%, way up. 0.038%. 400 parts per million. Now this is 2,500 pennies. Carbon dioxide levels are currently 400 parts per million. That's 400 over 1 million. That'd be 1 over 2,500. 2,500 pennies here would represent all the atmosphere. That penny represents the amount of carbon dioxide in our whole planet. This is all of our atmosphere. We contribute 4% of that penny. Let me just tell you, 4% of that penny's not driving climate. I can tell you that. What drives climate? That's a whole different lecture. I do have an hour-and-a-half lecture on that topic alone. But does carbon dioxide drive climate? Is it the thermostat? Let's ask the question, what is the number one greenhouse gas? Anyone know? Water vapor. Very good. Two good answers. Water vapor is the number one greenhouse. 95% of the world's greenhouse gas is water vapor. 95. Now, 5% is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a colorless, odorless, tasteless gas that's necessary for every living thing. Every green thing you see needs carbon dioxide. It's the molecule of life. Without it, we don't live. When does it work? Only during the day. It holds heat like a greenhouse gas, holds heat only during the day. Now think about that for a moment. It doesn't hold heat at night. That's why it gets cold. You ever go to Hawaii? Who's been to Hawaii? What do you notice about Hawaii at night? I used to live there. Hawaii is nice. I never closed my windows. I left them open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It was so nice. Water vapor holds the heat. And it holds it much better, much longer. Carbon dioxide holds heat only during the day. That's why it gets cold at night. Another thing, too, they say methane. How much methane's in our atmosphere? Anyone know? They're talking about these cows out here are causing climate change, right? Cow flatulence, methane, right? It's a problem. Well, if I had 400 of these here, 400 of these stacked up right here, it'd be a pile about this high. I measured it. that would represent all of our atmosphere. 1 penny would equal the amount of carbon or methane in our atmosphere. Now, do you think that 1 penny is driving the 400 things of these guys here? 500,000 to 1. That's the ratio of methane in our atmosphere. It is complete and total thermodynamic nonsense to think for a second that methane drives climate. Don't worry about your cattle. Please keep the dairies going. We need the milk and we need the meat. We don't need nonsense driving climate, or nonsense driving our climate agenda. How much money did our government spend last year alone? $300 billion our government spent to combat climate change. How does that happen? What a mess. We have a real problem if we're believing that carbon dioxide is the thermostat that drives climate. 4% of that penny is not driving this climate right here, this atmosphere. To think for a second that it is complete and total nonsense. I've lectured all around the world. Down to Australia, was down there. I do radio interviews. You know what? Most of my colleagues that I teach with, and used to teach with, and actually are professors, are been censored because it doesn't fit the agenda. There's an economic agenda. How much money do they spend? $300 billion, just our government alone in Washington. To think for a second that carbon dioxide drives climate change is utter nonsense. Now, I can do another lecture on it. What drives climate? There's a lot more to it than just carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a wonderful gas. Matter of fact, Patrick Moore, the founder of Greenpeace, says we need more of it because when you have more carbon dioxide, guess what happens? Plants become more drought resistant because they don't have to the stomatas don't stay open so long. So they don't transpirate. You get a quicker crop, more crop, and less water. It's a wonderful thing. Carbon dioxide is a great gas. It shouldn't be demonized and fought against in this climate change. All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Strickner.
Appreciate it.
Any other public comment? Shelley, do we check the internet for public comment?
I'm sorry.
Do we check the internet for public comment? For general public comment?
I did not receive any public
Okay,
comments.
great.
They come to me by email.
Great.
I'll post some content information, actually websites you can go to verify what I've said,
Thank you.
because that's important, because what is being
Okay,
taught-
sorry,
is not being-
your public comment time was finished.
I just want
Thank
to make
you.
sure everyone knows that they can check online and see my comments.
Thank
I'll
you.
do a little bit careful.
Please do. Thank you. Moving on to presentations, part of the agenda. We'd have no presentations. Is that right, Rihanna?
Not standalone presentations, we only have presentations with discussion components.
Exactly. Thank you. Approval of minutes. Approval of the minutes from the meeting from March 9th, 2023 and April 13th, 2023. A reminder, this is done on consent. It's an opportunity to bring up any problems with the minutes from those meetings. Anybody want to bring up any issues? No? None? I appreciate the council member's new haircut. I had not seen that yet. Fantastic. Great, the minutes are approved with no changes for those two meetings, and we're moving now to public hearings and matters for consideration. The first is agenda item number 2, EV charging infrastructure master plan presentation and discussion.
And then you can keep on the second one. So
Great. Sure. So I'm Brent Johnson, principal with NV5. We're based down in San Rafael. And I lead up the clean transportation work over at NV5. And we were selected to work on your EV charging infrastructure master plan. I'm gonna go to the next slide. So this is a quick overview of the scope that we're signed up to do. We're currently working on task 1, which is digging in on all of your sites, looking at what your vehicle portfolio looks like, and looking at a transition plan for those vehicles, and then trying to match up the EV charging infrastructure to go with that vehicle transition. So we're just getting started on that. We're going to do some site walks next month at about at 20 of your sites. We were contracted separately to work on the transit center because that is moving faster. That is already engaged with PG&E on their EV fleet program. So we're already doing the 30% design for that site for the transit center. And then following on from that first task, actually in parallel, we're working on incentives and grants, supporting that incentive and grant applications. After task 1, we're expecting a short list of sites that we'll take to a full design, get it permitted, and then support with procurement and implementation of the charging infrastructure on a short list of priority sites. And then task 6 was an optional task that we had in our task order to support fleet planning, and we are actually using that optional task to support Rihanna with inventorying all your vehicles and looking at a transition plan for the various city departments. Next one. So a little hard to see, but this is the site list that we're working on. The yellow sites are what we identified working with the city as the priority sites. So those are the sites we're expecting that would move forward into that initial detailed design phase of work. You'll see also that there is a column there for grant support. It's about 2/3 of the way over, NV5 supporting the grant. So that's the Cal EVIP sites that we're also lending some electrical engineering support to. So those are kind of moving on their own path that we're now trying to coordinate with this effort. But those are some grant-funded infrastructure project sites that we're working on with the city. And transit's crossed out there because that was in a separate task order, but we are working on that as well. That one is progressing faster than these other sites. Pause there. Any questions, discussion? Okay. Next one. It's a quick map of the sites around the city. L3 and L2, that's level 3 and level 2 charging infrastructure. And this is all preliminary because we're just scoping this at the moment. L2 only, those are the sites where we expect to have only AC charging. The level 3 sites are, in general, either have heavy-duty vehicles, have heavy-duty vehicles and are generally a larger fleet yard where we expect to need some faster or larger power charging. In general, we try and accomplish the charging with level 2 where possible, and that's generally possible with the lighter duty vehicles, just because level 2 charging is a much cheaper infrastructure, on the order of 4 times cheaper to implement than level 3 charging. Next one. So this
question, could you just tell us level 2, level 3, are you talking about what are we talking about, 220, 110, 440, or are we talking about what are the levels here? I'm not understanding.
Sure. So level 2 is the AC standard of charging, and it's usually done on a 208 or 240 volt. And the standard goes up to 80 amps. So most of the time we're implementing 208 volt, 48 amp up to about 80 amp on a single dispenser. And that gets you somewhere on the order of 10 kilowatts up to, I believe it's 19 kilowatts at the upper end of the standard 208 volts, like 17 kilowatts. So this is all AC, and then the inversion's done on the vehicle to DC to recharge the batteries. The level 3 is a DC charging. That we see dispensers as low as 25 kilowatts, but they can go up as high as, say, 350 kilowatts. I think most of the DC charging that we will end up speccing on these sites would probably be in the range of 30 kilowatts, maybe up to 100, maybe 150 kilowatts for fleet applications. Because
So a Tesla fast charging station, what level is that? Level 2 or level 3?
those are level 3.
Those are level 3?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like the ones at the Target, those are all level 3 chargers. So those are
3.
DC charging. And
Okay.
those will usually range anywhere from the earlier Tesla stations are on the order of 100 kilowatts, and now the newest ones can go up as high as 300 or 350 kilowatts, but there's not many vehicles that can actually accept that level of charge.
Right. And level 2 is like at my home, I have 220?
Yep.
That'd be, so it's 220, not 110.
Correct. 110 would be considered a level 1, and that's not usually something we would be considering in a fleet application like this.
All right, for cars.
Correct.
Okay, good. I just wanted to understand what level 2 and level 3 actually meant practically
Sure.
for us.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep. And in most cases, when we're doing a level 2, we're still doing a 208 volt 3-phase service supplying those stations. So we're usually looking for, still a 3-phase service, so a larger commercial type electrical service. Great. So just a little wheel showing our process here. Phase 1, again, is this kind of scoping and feasibility phase. We're down in those bottom circles there where we're engaging in the fleet planning. We've done a fair bit of data collection, looking at as-built on the sites. We're planning on doing the site walks next week, but we're trying to do some of that initial due diligence and get some preliminary scoping for what the infrastructure plan is for each of the sites before we walk the sites, so that we're looking at the correct things on each site. In some cases, we'll be trying to use the existing electrical services on the site, and in some cases, we're going to be putting in enough charging that we're going to want to pursue a new service with PG&E. And there are programs with PG&E where the utility will pay for some of that infrastructure, and both on their side of the meter and on your side of the meter. So wherever possible, we'll be pursuing that PG&E program on each of the sites. So once we do our site visits, we'll develop some concepts, socialize them with the city and the various departments, and conclude that phase 1 effort after we collect some comments, and we'll basically finalize the concepts for each of the sites. At that time, we're expecting to shortlist the priority sites, develop those into full designs, get them permitted with the city, and then develop a full permitted design package and help the city put them out to bid to the market. And then there's also construction on there, so we'd be supporting construction as your owner's engineer. Here's a schedule of the process that we're going through now. We're expecting to have these sites constructed in the fall of next year. I know it looks slow, but if you've ever worked with PG&E, this may be a little aggressive depending on how many sites we need new services for and getting them to install those services. There's, as you all probably know, there's a lot of lag in equipment in the construction industry right now. Transformers, switchgear, we're seeing 12, 18 months lead time on that. So this may be optimistic depending on how much new equipment we need to install on the sites. This is a little graphic from PG&E. The green side is the improvements that they need to make on the distribution system, bringing the power down to the site. Under the programs that we'll be working with PG&E, we'll be pursuing, we'll be looking for PG&E to provide to basically cover the cost of the green section here. both under their EV fleet program and under a relatively new rule for the IOUs called Rule 29. So for new EV infrastructure, the utilities are required to pay for the infrastructure for a new service for EV. But in the case of the EV fleet program, they also pay for some of the infrastructure on the city's side of the meter. So that's the blue on the diagram there. And depending on what kind of vehicles are behind the meter, you will be reimbursed per dispenser on the site to different levels. Transit is one of the highest levels of reimbursement. That's why we're currently working with the PG&E EV fleet program at Transit, but we can also get some reimbursement for some of your other fleet applications at your other sites. Next one. List of some of the rebates and incentives that we're looking at right now for the city. EV fleet, I mentioned. Air Board, Carl Moyer, that's one that we're working with a number of other public entities on, and is a good program to pursue, both for vehicles and infrastructure. Let's see. Another interesting one is the investment tax credit, which most public entities aren't used to seeing investment tax credits come up, but with the local IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a direct pay option where public entities can get reimbursed for solar batteries and EV infrastructure. So that's something, once you're implemented, we would look at requesting a reimbursement from the IRS on. Energize and Cal EVIP, those are programs, I think it's the Cal EVIP that the cities currently has a few of their sites, they have some incentives for. The FTA grant we're talking about right now and seeing if we could get an application in, or if we really meet the criteria, but there's federal grants to the tune of, was it 400 million or 700 million? 700 million for various public entities around the country that we're right now assessing, how much of a chance the city would have at applying for a grant like that. And there's a number of other federal and state incentives. So we have a large matrix going, and we're trying to vet what sites and which programs would work best for the city. Yeah.
Sorry, can you just give me a little more context on what these funding sources would pay for? Is this just for the scoping, the design, or is this actually the construction, installation, maintenance? Just trying to get a sense of the breadth of the funding.
Yeah,
possibilities
it's
here.
kind of all over the place depending on the funding source. Carl Moyer will pay for vehicle and infrastructure. So that's an attractive one. We use that a lot with school districts. So they'll pay for electric school buses and then the infrastructure on the school site, and it's relatively generous. EV fleet, I kind of ran through that one. CEC and CARB, those are usually kind of one-off programs that you'd find some grant program. I don't know that we've identified any specific ones under the CEC or CARB at the moment, but we've been a part of a few different CARB and CEC grants for public entities that they're kind of one-off, and you find one that would work for you, and they will often pay for vehicles, infrastructure, consultants, that sort of thing. I haven't found a good one with Sonoma Clean Power for commercial entities yet, but I haven't dug too far into Sonoma Clean Power. I think we've really identified the best options under PG&E, so the utility programs. Investment tax credit is really about the charging infrastructure, so it's depends on how many chargers you put in. And it does increase if you're disadvantaged community, but I don't think we would pass that bar in most of these sites. Cali, sorry.
That is increased if it's near a corridor, the highway, and I think that's where you're getting confused. I think it's 400 million if you're not near the corridor, and it's 700 million.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yep.
You are near the corridor.
And that's the FTA grant, correct? Yeah. Cal EVIP, I believe we have 10,000 per site is the current number. Between 5 and 10 by site. that answer your question? There's really a whole soup of incentives. And
Sorry,
grants out
sorry
there
for,
right now.
yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't mean to take you off on a whole tangent, but thank you. That definitely answered the question.
Yeah. So that's the slide deck that I have. Questions?
Wonderful, thank you. Any questions? Yes, council member.
Besides the actual sites you're evaluating, and may want to discuss actually the level, phase 1 and phase 2 on that. But my understanding was that you were also going to not only just look at these individual sites, but the overall plan, and also look at the overall plan for this entire city and maybe for PG&E, and how much push we can get from PG&E as we do this transformation, to look at a plan for the entire city, for how many households are going to be putting in charge stations in their homes, and how much force that's going to be putting on PG and projecting out, and then working with PG&E. So will you be doing any of this work beyond just looking at these particular buildings and sites, looking at the overall plan, overall energy use, to transformation for the entire city? Is that going to be part of your projections and estimations, or just you're looking at these sites only?
Current scope is just these sites.
Just these sites?
Yep.
Okay. Then on the list, you had phase 1 and phase 2. It looks like the high need is going to be, we already know those sites are going to be high need. I think the city probably identified we don't have to have all these sites. Is there a real reason to really look at these other sites that are low need, except maybe 1 or 2 charge stations, but for the most part not really needed? Should we really be bothering with those phase 1s, the ones that were on the bottom of that list? Can we cut costs and just look at the top sites only, and maybe start with those, and only do those instead of wasting time looking at the others?
I think that'd be probably a question more for our project manager. But so this scope came from the city. I would say we certainly could do that. I think there was an identified need to have some public charging at those sites in the form of, kind of lower power, where somebody's parked for a few hours, and provide public charging amenity.
Okay,
at some of
so the
those
plan
sites.
is for public charging as well as for our own fleet charging for the city?
Correct, yeah. So the scope of this is we're looking both at fleet and public charging opportunities. So some of those sites, some of the community centers and the pools and that, I think the idea is that there would be a public-facing charger with a billing system at those sites.
Right, and you'll be looking at not only cars and up, because I know the 2 other areas that I'm worried about is bicycles, because we have lots of folks now, e-bikes are becoming very, very popular. But also at the top end, if we're talking about larger than a light truck, the capacity is much, much higher and much higher need. So are you finding from what's happening in other places and other locations for larger commercial folks with larger vehicles, from mowers on up to larger dump trucks? Is that, from what your work in the past, does it look like that is an efficient way of using charge stations like this? Or, and is that where the future is? Or really, are we getting kind of over the top for expectations for what we're going to get, bang for the buck type things? Have we overreached trying to go after large trucks? I think light trucks are already pretty much hitting the limit from what I'm seeing. So why are we looking at larger things? Is there a cost efficiency long term for losing anything larger than a small pickup truck?
So we're talking about city fleets now?
Yes.
And converting city fleet vehicles to zero emission?
Yeah,
Or-
I think for the most part, we're talking about the cars and the lighter trucks, but I think there's also discussions, possibility to go even larger. So lawnmowers could be electrified. Larger trucks than a pickup truck, like one ton trucks and the like, could be electrified. I know Amazon's going for larger vehicles, Sprinter vehicles that are going all electric.
Sure.
So as you get larger in scale, is there a cost effectiveness, what you've seen in buying and using and charging up these larger vehicles for batteries, which are high weight? Or what have you seen from your experience? Should we be sticking with the lighter vehicles for all charge stations?
So about 2 weeks ago, CARB voted in the Advanced Clean Fleets rule. So any entity with a fleet 50 vehicles or greater, Class 2B and up. So Ford Lightning is a Class 2B because it's pretty heavy. But that's just to give you an idea of the bottom end of the range, up to Class 8. Starting next year, 50% of the purchases in those class ranges have to be zero emissions. This is public and private entities. And then 2027, all purchases in those class ranges have to be zero emission. There are carve-outs for certain vehicles like fire trucks and school buses, but that new clean fleet rule, in a lot of ways, forces you to start converting those heavier duty fleets. Price-wise, those medium and heavy duty vehicles are still quite a bit higher, on the order of 2.5, 3x of an ICE vehicle, an internal combustion engine vehicle. So and there's not a lot of option in those class ranges right now. So this is a big challenge in California with these new rules. And there's a lot of cost implication. So that's wherever you are going to be forced by those rules to purchase those vehicles, we really have to find incentives. And there are a number of incentives to purchase these vehicles, and or seek waivers that there is not a vehicle that matches your need in the market at the moment.
All right, so I'm looking at like the Corp Yard, and we already have all those vehicles parked there that are ICIs, internal combustion engines. And if we're required to do those conversions over the next 10 years by 2030, then we're going to be doing that. But sort of like the side question I was kind of asking is, from your knowledge, assuming your engineering background, that the efficiency really of operating electric large vehicles, in your opinion, what you know, do you feel like that is actually an effective use of electric vehicles?
I think it's a challenge at the moment with the weight of batteries. I think in terms of energy to move a vehicle forward, an electric motor is much more efficient than an internal combustion engine, right? So the energy in that diesel fuel, it's only something like 30-something% actually goes into propelling the vehicle forward. The rest is all lost to heat. Whereas in electric, something like 90% of the energy embodied in that battery actually propels the vehicle forward. So from that standpoint, electric's better, but there's a long way to go particularly in the heavy duty segment. There's still an argument for hydrogen, and there's a lot of work going into hydrogen in the heavy classes. Medium duty, we're starting to see some pretty decent efficiencies, and the total cost of ownership is coming down in the medium duty space. So the medium duty being like a box truck or F-350 or something like that. There's just not a lot out there commercially at the moment. But in terms of total cost of ownership, if we can get the vehicle cost closer to parity, the actual cost of operating the vehicle should be at parity or lower, just from the efficiency of the electric motor.
Right. I'm just going back to my physics class from 40, 50 years ago. F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration, and larger batteries, large mass, even a small amount of acceleration, and large amount of force. So I'm looking at just the forces involved in moving a large vehicle with a huge battery load. And what I've been researching and studying as they're going to larger vehicles, hydrogen's the way to go, not not batteries for sources of energy, and using solar power to generate the hydrogen. Much more efficient when you're dealing with large mass movements of things. So I just wanted to catch your opinion there and where we're going with all this as we develop our fleet, EV charge stations, whether or not how high we want to go with it compared to, okay, let's start looking at, like everyone else, at hydrogen as an opportunity for the Corp Yard if we're going to do larger vehicles, that maybe we switch to hydrogen instead. And if you're going to be giving us those evaluations only, or are you just going after EVs just because that's the ruling law in the contract? So that's where I'm going with this. To see where your ideas are and what you'd be recommending, and if you're going to stay in the box of EVs only, or if you're going to go into hydrogen for the larger vehicles. Is that part of the package you're going to be working on, or just the EV electrical charge stuff?
The focus of this is EV, And what I would say is hydrogen's a ways out. I mean, there are hydrogen vehicles out there. There's hydrogen fueling stations being put in, but it's really in its infancy. There's, I think, one liquefied hydrogen plant on the West Coast currently. All of this stuff is really in its infancy. And I think in terms of a vehicle life cycle and the current rules facing you as a city, you really, I think, if you are replacing those vehicles, if you need to replace those vehicles, your hands are going to be tied to really to EV in the next decade. That's my opinion. There are options out there. There are pilot options. Hydrogen fueling is extremely expensive at the moment, and the availability of hydrogen is really low. So unless you had some sort of regional hydrogen hub that you could rely on, I think you're quite a ways out from having hydrogen as your fuel for your heavy duty fleets.
Good. Let's take it a little simpler. I know I've been watching some of the legal actions, change.org and the like, trying to get into standardization of our charging plugging, just the actual plug itself. And at Tesla, there's a movement I know with Aptera's trying to get Tesla to go, okay, let's use Tesla's plugs, make that the universal automatic. Is that happening? Or in your opinion, from what you're seeing now, are we all going to the Tesla plug, or do we have to have a variety of plugs and play in these systems?
There's two standards out there. Well, three standards. There's Tesla, which I think is actually a superior standard, but I don't think the industry is going there. Everybody's using the CCS standard right now, and that's what we would be putting in at these charging locations is the CCS standard, which covers level 2 and level 3. And that's what's on every vehicle except for a Tesla, except for some older vehicles like a Nissan Leaf, which would be the Chatamo, which is a kind of even bigger, funnier looking plug. But the industry is moving away from that, and CCS is kind of the standard currently.
Yeah, right, because I did get a grant for our school at CASA to put in 2 charge stations over 10 years ago, and they sat there too long, and then all of a sudden they became obsolete because they were the wrong plugs.
Right.
And so they had to be returned at high cost, and to get the new ones, which are the standard plug being used in most vehicles, not Teslas,
Right.
On that. But the Tesla plug, from what I'm hearing, is possibly could become the industry standard within the year or two, if there's a legislative push for that, to make it all move that direction, as you said, because it is a superior system operating. So I just want to make sure we're aware of that, which way we go as we're watching that happen at the higher levels of federal government. So I just want to make sure we're tracking that, just in case we don't get stuck and all of a sudden the federal government says, oh, we're going to go to Tesla plugs for this point forward. So we'll make sure that we're convertible at some point in time. If we do one, that if that happens, we convert to the other one, how easy that might be. Okay, so just Tesla plugs. Then the last question I have for you right now, in all this, the study that we're doing now, is there a possibility that would include one pilot study, one actual action of operating, putting in the charge stations at even one site as a demonstration of capacity of how that works and how the system all works? Or can we get from just suggestions and paperwork and so forth to actually get things on the ground actually doing that? Is there a pilot project within this project that we're working on?
I think the closest to a pilot would probably be transit, just because we're moving faster there. They've got vehicles arriving, I think Q3 or Q4 of next year. So that would be the quickest I think we would see implemented infrastructure under this effort that we're doing.
Yeah, and that's a large fleet with buses. I think medium-sized buses, I think, is what's being on order.
Yep.
EVs that would be put in, and so, but still a fleet of them. So that would be a good demonstration. And will you be doing that, or are you just going to be tracking that as for someone else doing that?
We'll be doing the detailed design and then supporting the city during procurement and construction and commissioning of the systems. But I think the transit district will be operating the buses and monitoring the success of the program. We're not really signed up to follow the actual, once it's implemented.
Good, because I talked to the PG&E rep, they called me on other topics, but we got into this whole thing about battery storage like, and especially there's 2 mega battery storage facilities now on the plans through the county coming in as a possibilities that would increase some capacity and the like. Right now, locally, do you see the PG&E having the wherewithal and the capacity to really work with us in the city, not only for our fleet, but also as the city converts? Are you experiencing that PG&E is going to have the capacity to keep up?
That's a loaded question.
Yes.
Grid capacity is an issue, and the denser you get with a city, the bigger an issue it is. The transit site, for instance, their PG&E and the transit center have worked on an agreement to really manage load, so it's only after, I believe, 9 p.m. at that site is when they're going to do the bulk of their charging, and that's part of the condition of the level of power that PG&E is going to supply at that site. So there is some grid constraint in the area of the transit center. And this is something we'll uncover as we work with PG&E on each of your sites, is to understand the local grid constraints. Different utilities are at a different point in having this mapped out and having it publicly available. SCE just launched a website where I, as a designer, can go look and say, here's my site, and here's how constrained that grid is and how big an issue it's going to be to get the power levels I need to that charging site. So it's extremely site specific, and it's going to be a big challenge in this electrification effort that's going on in the state. And it's going to be particularly a big effort or a big problem in dense urban areas, and where you're talking about, I'm working with Culver City right now, 80 buses, dense urban area. The SCE interconnect is going to take us years to get the amount of power that we need to charge those buses.
Okay, good. And then as we move forward again, I'm a proponent for micromobility, tracking what's going on in Europe, where there's a lot of even the smaller micro cars that are being developed. There's some that out of Israel, the Transformer, which looks really a cool little car, and other vehicles, the Aptera is coming out. And they can be charged not with 220, but with 110. They don't need the 220. Just 110 overnight is enough to get all these vehicles charged up to the micro cars, even 3 and 4 wheeled, less than 1,000 pound or kilograms, 1,000 kilograms, but down to almost like 500 kilograms or 1,000 pounds, basically, instead of the 2,000 or 3,000 pounds we now run in vehicles. So can we include, at least for some of the public charging, or even for the bicycle charging and for micromobility charging, can we somehow also look at 110 charge stations for the micromobility component that's going to be coming?
We certainly could. I mean, it's not as big of a problem to solve with the power levels, right? It's much lower power level. I'm trying to think of a public access level 1 charger, and I don't know if I've seen one. But I haven't done the research into it.
Yeah, the shared
either,
bicycles are one right now. Shared bicycle systems are all on 110.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is typically a public charger, there's a billing system attached to that, right? So you're not giving away the electrons for free. You're not fueling folks for free. So the charger needs a billing system, and you need something robust enough to be a public charger. So I guess I haven't really looked into that, but it wouldn't surprise me if there are folks out there.
I'm hoping there's
offering
enough
that.
employees that might start riding their electric bikes to work, or their micro cars to work, and then charge up at work and then go on home. I do have my next door neighbor has a tiny smart car electric that he only gets 70 miles, goes to work, charges it up, he only needs 110.
Yep.
And in the 4 or 6 hours that he's at work, it charges up fine. He can get home to 35 miles. So he only needs a 110. He doesn't need the 220. He just needs a plug into the wall. If those could be, at least in their plans, I'd just like to see possibilities that included in some of the operations. So that micromobility is also included, not just larger SUVs that we're talking about in the fleets that are in there now. All right, I'll pass it on. I know I've taken a lot of time. Sorry.
Just a point of clarification there, and I think it'd be good for the rest of the commission to know, this was an item that was already approved by the city council, right, Rihanna? And so any kind of scope change would probably be good to take up with the city manager for potentials for scope change. I don't want to make you commit to anything here on the spot on the dais for a change, but excellent questions, absolutely.
And I think a big challenge with providing workplace charging is how do you charge for it? Is it an amenity that you're giving your employees, or is it something that you're going to charge for? And as we get more and more electrified, I think a lot of folks that put in those initial kind of free chargers are seeing the cost of those chargers stack up as, you know, more and more electrons are flowing into vehicles. So in general, we're seeing public entities looking for a way to bill for that electricity at that workplace charging, and that gets challenging if it's just an outlet for somebody, but
Great.
something to consider.
I just had a clarification. I was just wondering, I know I showed up a little bit late, sorry about that, but I was wondering about the incentives. I was just wanting to clarify, because at 2 points in the presentation, for one side, it seemed like there were incentives to get people to buy electric cars and to actually use the outlets, and on the other hand, it also seemed like they were incentives to like get people to build the charging stations, and so I was just wondering, like trying to clarify what the incentives are used for, basically.
Sure. For the commercial charging that we're looking at here, they tend to be for the infrastructure. In some cases, they're for planning and engineering efforts like we're doing. And there's also vehicle incentives. The vehicle incentives tend to be more in the medium and heavier duty classes because you're so far off of parity in those classes, right? Like a class 4 vehicle is still 2.5, 3 times the cost of an ICE vehicle. So in the sort of applications we're talking about, it's both vehicle and infrastructure, and in some cases for the engineering and planning efforts.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep.
Other commissioners, any questions for Commissioner Peters?
Sorry, and the list of questions, are we going to address those, or?
Yes, so there was a list of questions, Brent, that I sent. Do you have to review them, or do you have them available?
I can probably find those.
I guess, and can we put the either the map or the list up? You know, I understand to Commissioner Shrib's or Councilmember Shrib's comments, you know, the scope is to do 20 sites, and then the phase 1 sites with the level 2 chargers. I think he's making a valid point that the use case for level 2 chargers may not be very cost effective or adequate, and what the opportunity is to perhaps select alternative sites to be included in the scope. And so is that something that we can address?
So I can speak to that, Brent, if you don't mind. We are focusing on city-owned facilities because that's where our jurisdiction is. And so this list of 21 facilities are all city-owned facilities. The reason that we included all 21 within the phase 1, and even though, you know, numbers 12 through 21 will only have 30% designs, we want to electrify those sites in the future. We just don't have the funding currently to electrify those sites, but having 30% designs will make us more eligible for grant funding. If we have those designs in hand, then we can pursue funding to be able to prioritize those sites later on. Sites 1 through 10 are the ones where we critically need to have charging at those locations as soon as possible. And so that's why we moved those 10 forward into a phase 2. You know, one of your questions was maybe looking at the community center as a good location, and you said maybe the sports field. You know, I conferred with Diane Ramirez, my project manager that I'm working with on this, and the response is the community center main lot is a great location for corridor charging. And as we mentioned, there is an incentive that if you're within 1 mile of the 101 or a major corridor, the funding opportunities go go from 400 million to 700 million. The Casey Sports Field is a good idea, and we're not opposed to thinking about it, but it depends on existing infrastructure because it's significantly more expensive to add on to the electrical infrastructure if it's currently undersized. And the community center already has the lot, it already has some EV chargers, and so likely it's gonna have the electrical infrastructure that'll be much easier for us to plug into. And
Thanks for that clarification. And I guess going to the map, it would be, I guess it would be helpful at some point in the master planning to overlay a map of existing public charging. And I think you'll see, the public charging is all west of the freeway. And so in this map, it does show possibly one public facing level 3 charger at Lucchese Park. But I do think there's an opportunity to put at least one or two more level 3 chargers east of the freeway. And so that doesn't look like that scoping is quite going to happen the way this matrix is. There's no level 3 here. And also the community center number 10, I don't see a level 3X there, even though I see a red dot here. So just take that as a point of feedback, is I do think. Okay, the Waterfield office. So, yeah, that makes sense.
because we have larger vehicles within that fleet.
Yeah.
And so we are determining level 3 and level 2 dependent on each facility and what vehicles need to be charged there. Like, obviously, public safety is going to need to be able to charge faster. The fire department is going to need larger chargers, faster chargers.
Is that a foregone conclusion? I don't know, Brett, if you want to comment on that. I mean, my understanding of fleet charging is that it's mostly done overnight.
Yeah, it's quick turnarounds where we're looking at higher power. So
It can be done in 30 minutes.
with a fire or police vehicle, we're often looking at least a single dispenser or two dispensers for a quick turnaround. So if they're in some sort of emergency response role, we usually want to have that sort of backup quick fueling capability for them to turn a vehicle around quickly. And then once we get up into the heavier duty classes, they only take level 3, right? So like at the Waterfield office and you have a dump truck or something like that, we're going to have a level 3 for a vehicle like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's interesting in the budget that was reviewed on Monday, it looked like most of the heavy duty vehicle purchases were diesel and going to run on renewable diesel. And the police department budget plan was for 15 hybrid vehicles. And so,
I'm sorry, but I can answer that as well. That is because the technology is not currently there. They do not have EV police interceptors on the market quite yet. We're hoping that they will in the next couple of years. Ford is looking at maybe a Ford Explorer interceptor coming out in 25, but until then, our hands are tied. And in terms of the larger vehicles, the only reason we're going towards diesel as an interim step until the technology allows us to fully transition, and that's because we can do renewable diesel and cut emissions down to a third in that interim step on our way towards a full transition.
the city of Pasadena did just announce full electric interceptor vehicles. So I would caution us against making statements like that.
Pursuit-ready vehicles, because as far as I know currently, police departments are using Mach-E's and Tesla Y's, I believe, and that's because they are the closest to pursuit-ready, but there's not, as of last year, any pursuit-ready certified vehicles for the police departments. So you said
Is this the type of analysis that is considered as part of the optional scope under the NV5 agreement? That the fleet planning conversation of which these conclusions would be a result of that effort?
Yes. However, I don't think we're doing exhaustive research on the market, but we are looking at, what's in the market now and what we expect to show up in the market, over the planning horizon, which is, I think 2030 is what we're planning out to at the moment. So we're looking at what you're going to be forced to do by regulations, right? So that there is like I was saying, the advanced clean fleet rules and new purchases that are going to happen. We're looking at your current strategy, and then we're looking at each department's needs and wishes on what they'd like to implement for vehicles. And then we're matching the charging infrastructure with those vehicles.
Yeah, that's great. I would just caution us against getting ahead of those conclusions. And I guess just going back, I just want to re-stress this point on publicly available level 3 chargers. Is that going to be a consideration as part of this effort, or is the current matrix of no publicly available level 3 chargers for the phase 1 sites?
I think this is still in scoping. So if it certainly can be part of the scoping if we want to consider that. So.
Okay. When I'm done with my commentary, if there are other commissioners that would want to recommend more public-facing level 3 chargers on the east side, I encourage you to make those comments.
And just at one point on those higher power chargers, they obviously cost more money. And a lot of the times we see business models where you're leasing space to an entity that is going to own and operate those sort of chargers, the really expensive ones. The level 2s, lower cost, lower investment in the infrastructure. But the level 3s, in the business model I'm seeing the most out there is an entity leasing the space, and then somebody like an Electrify America or somebody like that actually paying for and maintaining and operating those charging stations.
You don't see the 30% design contemplating any of that activity. That would be a further effort.
Yeah, I don't think we were looking at that kind of alternative business model as part of this effort. This was really about city-owned infrastructure. Obviously, as part of the procurement, we would be looking at procuring the proper software and billing systems and all of that, right? But the idea of you leasing property to a third party, I don't think that's really envisioned. And it would be a different procurement, really, because I don't think we would do a full design on something and then you'd go to a third party lease, right? That would be, we could maybe.
Yeah, I guess I am a little bit concerned about that we're paying for 30% designs for level 2 chargers in locations where the use case of a level 2 charger isn't the proper use case, right? Generally, parks in particular don't have multi-hour vehicles parked there, and this is written about in the summary. And so, if the use case doesn't match, why would we be investing in the designs?
My understanding of this effort is primarily fleet focused, and then where we have the opportunity to put in some public facing chargers, we do. But Rihanna, I don't know if I'm misunderstanding the intent, but yeah, okay. So I think that was my understanding of the focus, is really to make sure that you have the fueling infrastructure for your fleet conversion, and that we would put in some public amenity chargers, but that they would be focused more on level 2.
Okay, I'll just make one last comment and allow some others to speak. I do think the one, if I could highlight one site in particular, the Library and Teen Center number 12, that is located at the fairgrounds, right? That is located at what is possibly going to be the future site of the public safety complex, right? And so if we're talking about a multi-year process to get PG&E infrastructure to do level 3 charging, I would encourage us to consider level 3 infrastructure at the broader fairgrounds property. And so that is a recommendation that I'm making, that be explored, because that is where, if I won't speak for the fire department, but my understanding is their preference is to relocate some vehicles and public safety buildings there. And so I would think we would like to include that as part of this scoping exercise.
So that is potential development, that is not concrete or secured at this point, and any future development that happens there could include fleet charging infrastructure as well within
I guess the idea of having the conversation with PG&E, recognizing that it does take multiple years to bring this capacity to these sites, I think we should get started on that if a possible development were to possibly occur.
Thank you, Commissioner Peters. Any other commissioners with any comments or questions before I go right to you after? Commissioner Gertie?
Oh, I guess I wasn't really clear. There was that list of questions. Wasn't sure if we were going to do our commissioner questions first, and then address the list, or I just wanted to see if that what the status was of it.
Commissioners have questions, because if not, then we can move to the list.
Okay, I guess
And some of the questions that Ben answered were actually.
yeah, definitely. So I think I'll just wait until we get to the list then. Sorry. Thanks.
Sorry, could I fill that on the list?
The transportation ad hoc sent me a list of questions
Okay,
for this presentation.
okay. We'll go to the council member and then the list.
And so the question would be on the, because with so many charge stations, especially starting to get into level 3s, and with an increasing capacity of a lot more lithium batteries being in vehicles, will we be including the reverse flow models that are coming out so that we can reverse the flow from the cars to the facility, as well as, so it's bi-directional? Will that be included in these plans, since that is the coming technology?
I think the challenge there in what usually termed vehicle to grid or vehicle to building is there are very few UL listed charging stations with that capability right now. There are a few, but one of the big pieces of this exercise is making sure we're picking chargers that work with the vehicles. And this is a big issue right now, is finding chargers that play nice with the vehicles. So it's V2G is pretty early right now. There's definitely a few implementations of it out there, but there's not a lot of commercially available chargers with that capability. There's also no level 2 chargers with that capability that you can use at the level 2 standard. So we're only talking level 3 for V2G. That
My understanding is the Ford Lightning is advertising level 2 reverse charging both ways whenever they put it into a home.
Yeah.
So this takes a special charger, but that's supposed to be part of what they're selling.
Right.
So, and if we're having fleets with lots of pickup trucks and Ford Lightnings involved, why are we not thinking about this?
Well, then you would have to commit to Ford Pro software across your fleet, which is a possibility, but we have to go through a competitive procurement. This gets really tricky because there are so many different charging manufacturers out there. The V2G standard is quite new and there's very limited infrastructure for it. And then you also have to have the right software for it. So it's certainly something that can be considered. It's just, it's nascent. And this is, every V2G offering out there is in pilot mode. So if we're trying to implement this program across the city, it's very hard to do that with infrastructure in that state of development.
And if we're not considering the using the vehicles as our secondary charge source in emergency situations, will your plans or scope including maybe some battery storage along with inside the buildings, as well as charging stations that are also would be charged with the same system? Since the vehicles are not there, we could be charging up the batteries inside the building or at a smaller unit like we're doing in homes, as a secondary emergency backup plan for if we're not going to be using vehicles as our emergency backup.
So resiliency is a huge topic as we electrify. It's also very expensive, especially if you're not using a gen set. So if you're going to solar and batteries, generally it's prohibitively expensive to offer resiliency at scale where you could potentially refuel these vehicles. If you're talking resiliency for the buildings themselves you know, it's obviously something we can explore, but it's outside the scope of what we're signed up for. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So the transportation ad hoc is a series of questions. Brent, have you seen these questions yet?
I have, and
Okay.
Rihanna and I both, she highlighted some for me to have answers for, and I think she has answers for others.
Okay. So I think I'm just going to ask the transportation subcommittee to ad hoc just to ask the questions. Just to clarify for everybody, this contract has been already voted on by the city council and approved. If any scope change, sounds like there is scoping going on, and what I heard from Brent, and so it sounds like that was a dangerous opening you gave there. So if any further comments from anyone on the commission, just keep that in mind that it's already been approved, but there may be the opportunity to affect the scope in the question. So please.
So yeah, thank you for this opportunity. I guess it'll flow a little better since I'll actually ask the question and then you'll answer. I want to start off by thanking you for your time here tonight. And it's a lot of questions. And I don't want to make it seem like you had to have a very, lengthy, thorough answer for each one. Anything that's more on the technical side, I think would be probably better suited to have a written response if that's something you have, because we don't want to make you get too technical on the engineering side.
Okay.
And if it's not applicable or feel like you've already answered it, also feel free to say so. And then at the end, we have just a couple of recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the basis of the rankings for the sites being considered? And I think you've kind of answered that, right? Like need, right?
So that was a question that
Yeah.
was assigned to me, and that's one that I feel like I answered, but if you would like me to reiterate, I can.
So, and it just, it was like, what wasn't clear was like, is police department definitely number one, and then community center is definitely number 10? Is that, should we read it that way? It's not
The police department and the water code office, they both of those locations have already started transitioning their fleet, and they do not have charging infrastructure, and so there is a real struggle that's happening on a day-to-day basis, and we're trying to get them infrastructure as quickly as possible.
Got it. Thank you. So one thing I noticed, and I think you actually also answered this already, can the sports field at Lucchese Park be considered as either part of one of the sites or in addition? The community center, while a good location, has very low use on a typical day, whereas the sports fields, I actually live right by there, so I just happen to know, they're filled with cars all the time because that's where all the Little League games are happening and soccer games, right? Cars are parked there for hours. So it seems like a better site. So just something to consider.
And that, again, is a question for me, and I do feel like I answered it. There's concerns about the electricity infrastructure that's already existing there, and we're not opposed to looking at that instead of the community center, but it would definitely be more costly.
Gotcha. Okay. So are there planned solar carports to be installed at the community center? I think Commissioner Peters may have some more insight on that than I, but wondering if
So that would be me as well. The community center is getting solar carports, and we're placing some underground conduit at the solar array to ease future installation of EV chargers under the solar canopy if we end up placing EV chargers there.
got it. Okay.
Beyond that, I would have to dig deeper into the answer.
That's okay.
Just to clarify, it's just that there's 2 X's, and I understand there's possibly 4 or more carports, and so I'm curious the X's column and if we should read anything into that.
For this list here, which ones are you talking about?
I see 2 X's, and I understand there's more that at least was contracted for. For example, the airport and the community center. It doesn't look like they have X's. I don't know if we should read into that at all.
For solar. That information probably came from Diane, and that's because I believe that those are further along in the process.
And I think we've just been learning more which sites that have solar. This was a table that we developed back during when we were responding to the yeah. So yeah, we're still learning more about the sites because we're just doing the due diligence on them now. So I think there are a few more solar sites than what are shown here.
Thank you. Will the senior center by Lucchese be considered a separate site?
So the senior center is listed as number 15. So it will be its own
It'll be
site.
its own site. Great. Why is the swim center listed twice, and why is
That
it?
is actually the Kavanaugh Center.
Oh,
So the swim center number 2 is actually the Kavanaugh Center.
got it. Thank you. And why is it considered a fleet site?
There are fleet vehicles there that are utilized.
Okay.
And in some cases too, we're looking at, when we were talking to the Parks Department, we were talking about opportunity charging when they're at some of these sites doing work at the parks to be able to
Yeah.
use the chargers at those sites as well.
Could we actually go back to the map? I think it would be helpful.
Sorry, these weren't labeled. We were
Yeah,
struggling to pull this together at the last minute. For
Oh, I
this,
appreciate
so.
it. At least we have something, right? Yeah, if it had numbers, it'd be a little easier to tell. Does the future Corona train station have plans to install charging? And I do see it. Looks like a level 3 site next door. That's a fire department. Okay,
Yeah, so that would be a smart ownership of that.
got it. So not city. Yeah. Okay.
It's out of the side of our-
Good enough. All right. And I'm trying to get through these quickly. Was a balance considered between the west and east sides of town? Was equity considered in that analysis?
So again, I touched on that a little bit. We were really looking at the facilities themselves and what's needed at each location.
Okay. I think the next one you've also addressed. This one's more technical, and feel free to say it's too technical for tonight. What is the design criteria for level 3 chargers between 50 kilowatts and 200 kilowatts?
Why don't I just stay big picture on that? So I think number one is finding chargers that work with your vehicles, right? So for instance, at the transit center, we're using ABB, which is one of the big entities out there that make level 3 charging. Another criteria that we'll use, these haven't been selected yet. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, it's something that will create a basis of design as we go into detailed design. Transit's a bit ahead because they've already applied for PG&E EV fleet. They had to select chargers as part of that. But what we've been doing is actually talking to Gillig and New Flyer, the buses that are coming, and saying which chargers work with your buses. Because actually, vehicle OEMs have blacklists of chargers that don't work with their vehicles.
Yeah.
Or don't play well with their vehicles. So we've been talking to the bus companies. ABB is on that list. ABB is also known to be good in the open charge point protocol, which is let software play nicely with that hardware.
Yeah.
There's closed ecosystems like ChargePoint and Blink and others that, only their software works on their chargers. So I think another big piece of this is having hardware that allows different softwares to sit on it.
Yeah.
So that we can seek a citywide software that helps control your charging across the city.
I'm going to go a little rogue off the question here based on your answer. This is something that's definitely a concern of ours, that my own charging experience out in the world has been spotty at best. And maybe could you illuminate to us, why isn't plugging an electric car, like plugging in your computer or any other regular AC device, why is it, why can't you just plug it in and it starts charging?
At a high level, there's software both at the charger level and on the vehicle level, and those softwares need to talk to each other. And I mean, just the other day, we've got a pilot of some class 3 vehicles going out, and they've got cold plates in them that charge the vehicle and the cold plate at the same time. The charger manufacturer pushed an update and basically broke that communication protocol. So both software engineers at both companies were scrambling, trying to get it fixed because we had the pilot about to go. So this is one of the biggest problems in this electrification journey we're on right now. And it's a problem that needs it really needs government to step
Needs
up and
standardization, right?
set a standard,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But we're not there yet.
Okay.
So in the meantime, we do our best to try and find chargers that universally work with as many vehicles as possible as part of this fleet planning effort.
Thank you. Okay, I'll try and get through the rest of these quickly. What is the status of applications to current SCP Cal? Oh, I think this is separate. Or SCP or Cal EVIP funding. I think you covered the SCP part already.
Cal EVIP, there are some secured funding for those. There's sites on that list where there are Cal EVIP funding, and we've been providing some electrical engineering support to the city as they're trying to get some chargers put in on the sites.
Is that a column we could add to that spreadsheet?
I think it's on.
Is it? Oh, I'm sorry if I missed that.
It says we are NV5 supporting grant.
Oh, is that?
So,
That's from
yeah, I
funding.
can label that better. There's much bigger spreadsheets than this. But
Thank you for not putting us through that. Okay, last couple here. Can we assume that if it's fleet, it's like an amenity of the site, right? Because it's for its own, it's for the city's vehicles, and then if it's not fleet, that it's a paid for charge kind of site, or is there more nuance?
that's the intention.
Yeah.
There's a nuance where if you have employees using fleet chargers, are you going to charge them for it?
Right.
And how do you charge them for it?
Yeah.
Billing systems have a cost to them. They add complexity to the machines. So it's probably better to develop some policy and maybe some flat reimbursement, because if you start putting billing systems on those fleet chargers, you also are going to invoke accessibility requirements.
Right.
So all the public chargers, we have to think about accessibility.
ADA and
ADA,
yeah. Mhm.
path of travel. And in a lot of our design work, that ends up being more than half of our effort is that accessibility and then the
Yeah.
upgrades.
What
to
is
the
it like?
parking lots.
1 to 4? You don't run into that problem, but after 4, or it's something like that. Some kind of rule like that, right?
There's accessibility comes in at any level, but you start having to add additional spaces for van accessibility and really having to. The more chargers you put in, the more
Yeah.
accessibility becomes a bigger deal.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. And then, well, I guess as part of that, has there been analysis about like how much money charging these vehicles versus using gasoline or diesel will save the city? Has that kind of been done?
That would be part of a total cost of ownership analysis that we
Yeah.
would do. And included in that are the LCFS credits, the low carbon fuel standard credits, which have gone down recently, but in a lot of ways, those help defray some of that cost of electricity. Also really critical to that TCO analysis is having software that optimizes charging and make sure you're charging on the lowest cost time of use period and keeping your demand as low as possible.
Yeah, that on my day job, that's something I work for MCE, so
Okay.
we have a program like that. Sonoma Clean Power has it too. Okay, last question and then we'll have our recommendations. The scope includes a cost estimate for ongoing maintenance, but not a maintenance plan per se. Will that be negotiated with the charging station vendor or vendors?
So I would anticipate as part of our procurement, we would be looking at both the capital project and then the ongoing operations of the system. The ongoing operations would be both software and then some sort of arrangement. Typically, we like to see an uptime guarantee.
Yeah.
And putting that.
Can you explain what an uptime guarantee is for the?
So that means the station works a certain percentage of the time.
Right. Yeah, I think the federal government has proposed something like 90-something%, right? And
97%, I
Yeah.
believe, for the NEVI funding. Something, I think it's 97. I was just seeing Tesla has the best record in the industry. They're up in the 99s, which is mind-boggling.
because they own the hardware and the software, right? So it's
Exactly,
everything plays
exactly.
together. Yeah.
But I would see that so we haven't built a procurement with you yet, and there's going to be constraints on what you can do as a city. But as much as possible, we would recommend to try and find the entity that puts it in to have be on the hook to have an uptime guarantee and and also operate that software, upgrade the software, make sure these things work for the long haul.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this is something I've pestered Rihanna to, because, you know, I've my own experience, everyone I've talked to has this experience of, you know, you go to use charger, doesn't work.
Yep.
And really puts a black eye into the face of, you know, what we need to do and electrify all our vehicles. So really hoping we can have some robust maintenance as part of any contract. So my two recommendations. Oh, sorry.
About procurement, and I'm sure you are all aware, but I'm saying this just in case you're not. The city being a charter city, we have to go out for competitive bid, and we also are not allowed to do design builds. That's why this had to be design work and then construction work. And because MB5 won the bid for the design work, they are precluded from bidding for the actual construction installation work. And that's one of the reasons why it was written into the scope that they would help with the procurement process. And so that
Got it.
it's much easier for the city to move forward with that process and plus the design work as well.
Much appreciated. Yeah, thanks for the clarification. Okay, recommendations, and then I'll get out of here. So we recommend that you coordinate with the Transportation Ad Hoc, that's myself and Commissioner Peters, and the staff for feedback in all design, or design best practices. Sorry, a little tired, long day. And then our other recommendation is that all internet connections should be hardwired for the chargers, especially with any payment systems. And level 3 chargers should have redundant internet connections for all systems, especially, you know, you can imagine the police or fire, right? Internet goes out, you know, and they can't charge. It's really not good. So those are our recommendations, and we really appreciate you hearing us out.
Based on that last recommendation, Diane and I discussed, and we will be asking IT to go on the sidewalk visits with us to see where that is.
Wonderful. Glad to hear that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Gardy and Commissioner Peters. Not seeing any other comments from the commission. Are we taking any public comments on these two items tonight? We are. Shelley, do we have anybody online interested in commenting?
There were no public comments received.
Okay, thank you. With that, Brent,
Great.
thank you very much.
Sure.
We look forward to hearing progress on the planning and the procurement.
Great. Thank you.
That was more robust discussion than I expected, but a good one. Everybody kept on topic. All right. So our second matter for consideration, or I guess public hearing, is on consumption emissions presentation and discussion. I understand we're going to be hearing from Commissioner Orrit and Commissioner Baker on this, correct? Wonderful.
We've got a PowerPoint. How about that?
I saw.
Oh, maybe we don't need to go through it. Well, Rihanna's pulling that up. So apparently, I guess everyone has a copy of that thing. Great. So you can dig through the details, and below each slide in the notes section, there's references to where the information came from. If you want to dig into that, including reference to where the Earth came from. So, okay, we set to go? Sure. And Ann's going to jump in and keep me online as we go along and fill in the missing parts so we make it entertaining. Okay, so here's why we're gathered. We're gathered here to protect life on this beautiful planet. And we're paying attention to the atmosphere and the hydrosphere. Okay, next, please. So we're looking at consumption emissions tonight, and the only measurements we have to date were those done by the group at Berkeley for the year 2015. So these are the data that they provided, and there's a link to where it came from. And the only change here is I added in impact of fugitive methane emissions that are coupled with the natural gas used. And that's a little 1.65 with the red dot, and the indirect, the consumption emissions associated with natural gas. So I'm trying to make it complete with the current knowledge. Okay, next, please. So if you break that out, 71% of the emissions, the household emissions in Petaluma are the indirect, the consumption emissions. Did you have something in? Okay. And the other part are basically the emissions from fossil fuels consumed within Petaluma. So it's a big chunk. So what we're going to do is break out that that orange part a little bit and show what we're finding that can help inform our decisions going forward. Okay, next, please. And push the button again, Rihanna. I think, yeah. So we're trying to get a sense globally, where do we stand? With this data, we're about 20 metric tons per person per year, per resident per year. And next. And this is what the C40 cities show, how the unit emissions, per capita emissions show up around the world, different spots in the world. So we're pretty high. And remember, this stuff is done not by any completely accurate, repeatable means around the world. So everyone has probably different ways of estimating these values. So we're just trying to get a sense of what's going on with these data. We're not trying to nail anything down. And next, please. So I found an MIT study that sort of comes with the same general numbers, 20 metric tons per person for North America, and versus the world average, 1/5 of that at 4 metric tons per capita. So this is the equity part of things, and why our consumption emissions appear so large, because they are. Okay, next. Then we broke out all the emissions for the city, and here we kind of stretched the Berkeley model a little bit to throw in. We broke out into direct emissions and consumption. We've also added something for municipal, so that's city hall, heating and so forth, and also nitrous oxides emitted from the sewer plant and fugitive methane from the Redwood landfill. Those are the two, and refrigerants in refrigerant leakage of food processors and supermarkets and so forth in Petaluma. That's in that municipal section as well. And then we stretched it out to 2040, thinking ahead to how much sequestration we're going to need. And we'll get to that when we're done here, because we're going to need input on what we think the ramp down is going to be certainly in the direct emissions as we go forward. And Ann and I can take a shot at the consumption side of it, but it's not going to come down too much probably until the whole world starts to change. So the reason we're looking for this, we're thinking in terms of, there's two major things to think of over the long run. One is there's the special report from the IPCC in 2018, I think it was, talked about what it takes to prevent average surface temperatures from rising more than 1.5 degrees centigrade. And that means globally, we can't emit more than another 420 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. Petaluma's share of that is about 3.3 million tons through 2038. So we're just setting that self up so we can look at that. The other one is to look out to 2050. And the idea is that if we can get to climate neutral worldwide by 2050, if we can get down to pre-industrial carbon dioxide emission levels by 2050, then we have a good chance of recovering restoring a lot of life functions. So we were just setting up for that. And here you can see the breakout between direct and consumption emissions. Okay, next, please. And then final reference to the Berkeley study, they gave an estimate for each city they reviewed GHG reduction reduction. And so the red chickens are kind of what we think the city can help most with, and the rest are the consumption emissions, which a lot of the Cool Petaluma work can assist. So the big things for the city appear to be related to general plan development. And that's the infill development, safe streets, that kind of thing. And certainly helping with building electrification, to whatever it's going to take to push that along and make it happen. Okay, next, please. Then we're starting to break out. So we're going to look at transportation, skip over buildings because Ann, our chairperson, is so strong on the embedded emissions of buildings. We won't talk about that much tonight. But in transportation, here's a little thing where you can see the gray chunks of these horizontal stacking bars are the consumption emissions. The green is mostly the operational direct emissions. So you can compare, for example, active transport, the life cycle emissions per person mile or passenger mile with the active transport versus EVs versus at the bottom of the thing, gasoline cars. So the active transport is about 1/5 that of EVs, and the EVs are about half of a gas car by this analysis. There's a breakout of all these things. Next, please. Here's another version. This came from a more local thing because it includes BART, Muni, and airplanes. But again, the active transmissions over on the left are obviously pretty tiny, as we would hope they would be. And part of this is to show the real value of adjusting land use so that active transportation can really be promoted or be attractive to our residents. That's part of it. The other part, we can't see it here. There's a lot of embedded emissions in electric vehicles, and they're costly. So another way to get that down is if we can share fleets of vehicles of different kinds, it makes it more accessible financially and a lot less impact on the climate thing that we're trying to solve. And even here for buses, we can see on-peak bus versus off-peak bus. There's a big difference, as you might expect. Okay, next please, Rihanna. And here's my own experiment. After I was messed up by leaking gasoline from the fossil fuel economy from a gas station, I got sick. When I got out of the hospital, or where I was leaving, the vascular surgeon said, well, Ned, you should walk a lot. Otherwise, we might have to amputate your leg. So that was enthusiasm, but it's not the kind of leverage I want to offer to the rest of our residents, but it worked for me. So each year I've been walking more and more as I realize I can do just about everything walking. And it's fun. You meet interesting people, lots of fun dogs to pet and everything. And it's kind of fun. So each year walk more and more and drive less and less. And it's just pretty simple. And it'd be so much easier to cycle because I used to be a bike racer for years and years. But after strokes, not a good idea. So walking is what I do. Okay, that's that. So consumption emissions, how do we address them? There's two main ways, and that is paying attention to how goods are produced, and with the emphasis changing to after you created a product or food or clothing or whatever, is the biocapacity of the earth increased or decreased from that effort? And this is a transformational thing. We have to shift for this all to work to an increase in natural potential of the earth, not destroy it, however incrementally. That's the wrong direction. So that's a big change. The other is helping the consumers consume with more knowledge and thought and care. So we want to, as people start to learn to select things that add to the regenerative mode, that's the new word going around, I really like it. That's good. Now, how do they know the impact of various goods? Well, I think that's where governmental assistance can make a big difference. Just as we label things for their energy impact, miles per gallon in each different car you look at, we can get guidance about the climate impact too. But it has to be done in a reputable, repeatable manner. And we think EPA or something could get into that. I started to talk to Jared Huffman about it, but then I realized I hadn't done my homework properly and didn't want to dump on him. So, but he was interested in that kind of thing. And then we throw in here that faith communities can help on this kind of thing too. Education can broaden, because interdisciplinary education is starting to appear, and that's kind of what we need for this sort of thing. It's showing up in industrial areas, but probably not to the depth that I would like to see. That's in the ESG reporting is going on the main financial centers. Okay, next, Rihanna, please. Yeah, so here's going into the production side, and the paradigm change, the shift we're talking about from what they used to call technological sustainability, moving to the ecological sustainability framework, which is the regenerative framework. Looking at the whole Earth as a system, that becomes our benchmark. How do we improve that? Next. And where some of this is starting to show up in cities, the key one, I believe, at this time is probably Amsterdam and cities and Brussels and some others up there. They're looking at the circular economy principle, where they're trying to set up products so they can be reused, recycled cleanly, and so forth. And that came out of the work of Kate Rayworth with her donut economics idea. And a group in The Hague, run by the World Resources Institute, is pushing this thing called PACE, or Platform for Accelerating the Circular Economy. There's really interesting information on the web about that, and I've been on some Zoom meetings with them. San Francisco and Portland are the only cities I'm aware of that are specifically looking at consumption emissions. We've reached out to both of them for detailed input. We can ask them questions, and they said, those are really deep questions. And we haven't received anything back of value at this point. But there's something out there. But outside of that, there's certainly emergence and guidance in other ways. And I've really been lucky to participate in this deep transformation network that Jeremy Lent set up. He's the one who wrote The Web of Meaning. And he's now working on a book about how to get to an ecological society. Brilliant man, talking to a lot of people. And the people who've shown up in on the Zoom calls are just so fascinating and inspiring. And most of them have really done their homework, and they really looked into this, and they care deeply about it. Their hearts are in it. Another one is the Regenerative Organic Alliance, which we're going to talk about food things next. And this is an interesting elevation of organic agriculture to bring in the regenerative concept. Okay, next, Rihanna. So on food, we're going to say a little bit about this because this is the biggest single section of consumption emissions in Petaluma. And what they're saying is the system doesn't work because there's a lot of greenhouse gases coming out of agriculture. There's pollution that's hurting things. And certainly we know we're in the midst of the sixth great extinction right now. Biodiversity loss is a big, big deal. And the destruction of life in the soil, our fellow who started us off today, that disrupts the whole hydrologic cycle, which is the big part of moving heat around in the planet, and seeding clouds. And then filling them up with water so they can rain. Okay, next. Okay, so we looked around some of these pie charts. And again, I think this is just for, just kind of a basic reference point, but don't put a lot into it. But looking at the life cycle On the left pie chart, what was interesting to me is that, well, obviously food production is the big chunk, but personal transportation is, by this reckoning, more than twice that of supply train transport. So we're spending a lot of time just going to the store or whatever in our cars, perhaps. The next pie chart on the right, the breakdown by greenhouse gases, well, not surprisingly, carbon dioxide is large. Methane, that's related to animal agriculture. And nitrous oxide, that is from fertilizer use and production. And nitrous oxide, like global warming potential, I think 270, something like that. So it's an important one. And if you get to completely regenerative agriculture, you don't need fertilizer anymore because the soil can make it itself in the mycorrhizal sponge. The mycorrhiza will extract the needed nutrients from rock fragments in the soil. That's the way it's been done for such a long time until now. Okay, next. So this is looking at greenhouse gas emissions, where you can see by food group, the various intensities, kind of starting with the meat and working its way down. And next. And another version of the same thing, and this shows up in the things that are put out by the Cool Planet Network, or excuse me, our Cool Block group now, saying that you want to eat lower on the food chain. And here's the impact on the left side. Dairy is big, red meat the biggest. But what if we approach this a different way? So next little button, Rihanna. So here's the question. How can this guidance change when we start to move in a regenerative direction? Well, here's the next slide, Rihanna. Here's a start. Strauss, I came here 30 years ago to build methane digesters on family farms, and then PG&E retracted the tariff that paid for clean energy. So anyway, Albert Strauss asked me to write his business plan for the first organic dairy in the western United States. So here he is now. Now he's working, he's taken that, he started with that, and now he says, well, let's see if we can make our milk with less climate impact than plant milk, rather than just complaining about plant milk like some of the other dairies. So he expects by this year to have the milk produced on his ranch in Marshall to be down at the level of plant-based milk. And how is he doing it? Well, that's on the next slide. He's always been an organic, because that's why we wrote the business plan. He had to create his own creamery to keep his milk separate from conventional milk. They've been doing carbon farming out in West Marin for 20 years. That is putting compost on the pastures and grazing the cattle in organized ways, so that their hoofs are helping to make the soil work. The methane digester he's making, he scoops up all the manure out of the barns and digests it and makes electricity and heat. That's probably the biggest climate impact of all of these, or climate assistance. The other thing he's done is he's feeding red algae to his animals, and not in a very small amount. Out of all the food they eat, he puts in a little bit of red algae, and worked with the Secretary of Agriculture in California to get that okayed, and got help from UC Davis to monitor what's going on, and then help otherwise to get it into the organic standards. So that's what he's doing. He's feeding the red algae, and the methane, the enteric methane they call it, from the cows burping as they eat, it's gone down. It can go down as much as 90%. There's things like 70% reduction. And that's something that's never been recovered before. He began with the idea of using reusable glass bottles, and he still is, and gets about a 75% return rate, and those that aren't returned can be remade into fresh glass. Finally, he started electrifying his major farm equipment. It's not easily done, but he just hires mechanics to come in and tear out the diesel engine and put in electric and put in batteries, and he charges it from his methane digester. So next. So then, at the end of life of food, what are we going to do with the waste? And there is a lot of waste. And I found a source somewhere that said that the carbon footprint of the food waste is greater than that of the airline industry. It's not trivial. Next. So EPA has this thing, we want to use the food as food for people, for animals, whatever. And then you can, less attractive, but you can do other things with it, composting and landfill. So I'm interested in looking at this. And see, next slide, we'll talk about how. First of all, instead of composting food waste, if we can put it through an anaerobic digestion pathway instead of aerobic digestion, there's no methane loss. You don't need to import energy to run the processing plant because you can make energy from the anaerobic thing to run it. From that, you create biomethane and convert that to dimethyl ether. That's been tested widely by Volvo in Sweden and Norway for running trucks. It's a drop-in fuel for diesel. It's not renewable diesel. It's dimethyl ether. Just stick it in and run the vehicle. You can also take it through a new process and convert it to hydrogen. And it's green hydrogen. It's not pink or blue, or you don't have all these. It's green hydrogen. So the idea is, well, could we run the SMART train on hydrogen? Because they found in Germany the least expensive way to electrify a suburban railroad is to use hydrogen. You put hydrogen on board the locomotive, pressurized, run it through a fuel cell, makes electricity, and off goes the train. Or the Larkspur Ferry. Or how much of this stuff do we need? How much compost do we need to do our sequestration? Well, we're going to get to that later. It's going to be a lot. A lot. But where are we going to get enough biomass to do this? Well, how about growing some kelp in the ocean? Because kelp pulls down CO2 3 times faster than does tropical rainforest for the same area of Earth's surface. So I want to talk to people about that, starting with the Bodega Marine Lab. But we have to put all these pieces together. We're looking at all these kind of pieces. We're not ready to come up with a solution yet, but that looks like this whole series. There's a lot of moving parts, but it could be an example of regenerative approach toward this sort of thing. Okay, next. Now let's turn to refrigerants. Refrigerants, they're a big deal. When Paul Hockenroth's book Drawdown, refrigerant gases was #1 on his list of things to do. That was in 2017, something like that. Now it's still in the top 10. It's a big deal. Okay, next. And here's why it's a big deal. This is from CARB, the California Air Resources Board. They say that the F gases, the hydrofluorocarbons, which are the main ones used as refrigerants now, that's the chemical used to make stuff cold. The fastest growing source of greenhouse gas emissions globally and in California. And part of the reason is we're trying to get rid of gases that destroy the ozone layer, the ozone depleting substances. Their replacement has been hydrofluorocarbons. So what can we do besides them? Now, the Air Resources Board's, their short-lived climate pollution strategy calls for a 40% reduction of those gases. But the trouble is, you usually stair-step down. As you replace one gas with another, you have to replace the refrigeration equipment and the line sets and this, that, and the other thing. So usually it's tiny change just once every 15 years or so because it's so expensive to do this. So what can we do? Next slide. Here's the choices of refrigerants available. If you can see on this, I can't point to it, but this little bar chart on the bottom left of your screen, at the top, the green thing are what's called the natural refrigerants. And they have greenhouse warming potentials between 1 and 4, something like that, 1 and 4. medium GWP stuff is greater than 1,000, and the stuff used now is up to 4,000. And the average in most supermarkets in California is about 3,500. So 3,500 is a big number. So of all these refrigerants, CO2 is the safest of them. It's natural. It's not a synthetic thing. It's not going to produce horrible stuff in the environment like trifluoroacetic acid found all over Norway ice cores now. So next, who uses this stuff? Well, in Europe, 29,000 supermarkets are now refrigerated with CO2. They've accepted it. They've jumped on it. What could we do here? Next. Here's what we want to do. Aaron Daly has jumped up. He used to be the World Energy Manager for Whole Foods. He's anxious to help on this. And your friend Andy Schrader. So what we want to do is find grant support, probably $2 million or so, to see if we can electrify one Petaluma market as a demo, go straight to CO2, so it's job done right off the bat. You don't have to keep going after it every 20 years. And electrify the store at the same time. So electrify and switch to the low GWP refrigerant. And then when that's done, we would provide guidance for the other stores, help them, and hopefully leverage legislation or create, there are senators in California interested in doing this, create legislation to advance this elsewhere. But someone's got to start it. Why not Petaluma? I think that's it. And next, we're just about there. So these are the concluding thoughts. And you notice I love this picture. This was when it was snowing on Sonoma Mountain, but there was a horizontal rainbow at the exact same time. Okay, next. Oh, finally, on the refrigeration, there's about 25 entities in Petaluma that are listed on the ARB website for HFCs. That means they have more than 50 pounds of high-strength refrigerants. The biggest one, just so you know, is Lagunitas, the brewery. Second biggest is probably Petaluma Poultry. And then there's half of them are supermarkets. So the supermarket's pretty easy to design, I would think, compared to food processor. So what all this is telling me after all the work we've been putting into this is that the path forward really calls for cultural transformation, thinking of the earth in a wholly different way. And this is where I go back to Thomas Berry. He says, as we know, we're bringing an end to the Cenozoic era, the last 65 million years or so, the Cenozoic era, a whole biogeological era with this sixth great extinction. But Berry, he thought, what's coming next? And then he came to him and he called our friend Brian Swim. He said, Brian, it's the Ecozoic. It's the time when humans become mutually beneficial to all of life. Now, that's a cultural transformation for you. But then we can look backwards a little bit. There's a reference in your notes to Lila June, as a Diné woman from Taos. She has this tremendous, it's a short TED Talk. It is so fascinating to listen to. But she talks about, no, we don't want to just step aside and back off and let Earth regenerate. We are here for a reason. We're a keystone species. We can pull it together. And a matter of fact, they did. They created, they opened up the prairies with their fire so that the buffalo had expanse all the way to what's now Pennsylvania and south to Louisiana. I never knew that. So anyway, it's fun to listen to. I think that's it. Just check it, Rihanna, see if there's, that's it. Well, thank you very much. We've enjoyed working on this.
Thank you to Commissioner Orrit and Commissioner Baker. Any discussion, any questions, any reflections on the presentation?
I guess just on the natural refrigerant one, I do think that is related to the Cicerco audit, and I would hope that the natural refrigerants are part of that evaluation. So that is one thing I'd specifically like to request. So I think there's plenty of opportunity for that. I will also comment, it seems like we need to start budgeting for offsets. And if we are going to achieve our goal of carbon neutral by 2030, that will require purchasing of offsets, be that, from some of the methods that Ned mentioned. And so that is something that we should carry forward into the next budget cycle. I don't know how many municipalities are budgeting for these offsets, but if we were to set aside a budget and then spend that locally on regenerating our kelp forest, I think that would be a powerful message. And so that's something I think we should start considering and discussing.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other commissioners, comments or discussion? Commissioner Gardy?
Just briefly, thank you so much, Ned. It was very enlightening. And just to Commissioner Peters' point on natural refrigerants, the CO2, in addition to being a refrigerant for space cooling, is a great refrigerant for space heating through heat pumps. I've only seen one company that has a market-ready product that I've worked with, but I would definitely encourage, as part of the Cicerco contract, to take a deep look at that, and happy to help if you need any resources on that. Thank you.
Councilmember? Councilmember?
Yeah, just like to support, Ed, what you've been saying, and it actually has been known for some time. I've been tracking, I guess, climate change and these things for a long time. I know my guru was Lester Brown, who did World Watch before he got even to Plan B 4.0, and there was a lot of information in his World Watch information about both the consumption part, the food production part, and since I was in international agricultural for several years, so I've been tracking since the 1970s the changes in agriculture worldwide, of how to feed the world. And there's regenerative agriculture is slowly taking. In fact, we did get the soil folks who did the no-till and moved that forward in the Midwest. That actually started about the 70s, but really got going in the 80s and 90s. So it took about 20 years, but the possibility for change is now much faster. We have precision agriculture that's coming. Even the kelp forest, if there was a way of regenerating that. Of course, there's other problems that we're facing, natural and also plastics, and there's a whole slew of oceanic problems that we're facing that's causing problems for the kelp forest farming. But you're right, if we could do more of that, that would be really great. That I've seen that and heard of that before for kelp farming. And I think even down there, if you go to Monterey Bay Aquarium, they actually, that's one of the things they talk about at their kelp forest demonstration. They've been doing that for over 20 years. So a lot of this is not really new information, but it's stronger and stronger evidence saying this is what we need to do. These are solutions we need to go after, and it needs to be done. Every location, every locale in the world needs to achieve this. And one of the things I did recently, I guess the last couple of years, was there's a group now, the UN, and is now using a model that was developed by MIT. It's called En-ROADS. And it's a very powerful tool. They're trying to get that into every public policy agency as much around the whole world. And so I've been at workshops with that. And these concepts that Ned's presented today with the AND support are all within that model of what we do. We need to do 1,000 little things, and we all need to do them at the same time. There isn't any one, two things, transport or housing, that's going to solve our issues. So that goes a long way. This does tie in, our speaker earlier today did talk about water and ice ages and the like, and there is some correlations. So he's not entirely wrong in his statements, but I think we know that water is the number one greenhouse gas. It is why we are livable here on Earth. Otherwise, we'd be like a minus 100 degrees on average if it wasn't for water. So it's a huge number freezing where we would be if it wasn't for being a water planet. So we're very fortunate to have our water. It saves us, and if the water increases in vapor, that holds more heat, moves more heat around the earth. So yes, so water, the climate change we're seeing in the hydrologic cycle. So he is totally correct in those statements. I would absolutely disagree on the statements about carbon dioxide that he stated. I don't know if anybody was listening to that earlier, but the physics that I've looked at the numbers and run the numbers myself, looked at some of the research papers, and the numbers do indicate that the change in climate right now is CO2 and greenhouse gases that are causing the differences, but those differences are being also impacted by the water vapor because oceans putting more water vapor in the air, causing a greater shift in our hydrologic system is the consequence. And there's feedback loops between the two. So that's what we're facing today. So he wasn't totally wrong that hey, it's the water that's the issue. It's actually right. That's where we're seeing the impact most, but it's being triggered by the greenhouse gases, and so it's in combination. I think that's what's not being talked about enough, probably, so that it's more clear that even though we're talking about greenhouse gases and that's what we're attacking, we can't attack the water. We don't have the control on the water. We do have control on the CO2 and the greenhouse gases. So that's where we can take actions. So I just want to make your comments that's related to what's being discussed now and fits in. So one of the things that I was hoping to do is maybe this group could start off and actually do like a workshop with the En-ROADS model. I was trained as a facilitator in it, so I could run that a little bit, but I'd actually invite someone else to do it, so I'd like to be a participant. And actually get it up into our city council and staff so they can actually review all the opportunities that in consumption as well as transportation and housing that we really need to approach as a locality and working through cool blocks and like. We have a movement going, and so I'd like to see it continue. So those are, I'd like to support Ned and Ann for putting this together. And the consumption index, we need to change our behaviors entirely throughout, not just change our cars, not just go over to EV cars. That's not going to solve our issue at all. Those are small things. Bigger things is behavioral changes in our entire lifestyle is what needs to be accomplished in the future. So I just want to support what Ned has presented here, and that what we're doing at the city level is what we can do, but as a nation and as a civilization, we need to do more than what we're saying, even in our general plan that's evolving. And the other thing I'd like to add, our budget, if you were watching the Monday's meeting with the budget plan that came out of $288 million, the very first chapter of the book, this big binder that was handed, is about climate actions and how we're meeting and how everything in the budget plan moving forward is not only are we doing what we've always been doing, but now that's going to be an overlay of everything that we do. And that's right, the first chapter coming into this binder. So we've made an impact. The General Plan Committee has made an impact, and it's moving forward. We just need to keep rolling downhill even faster with the bigger and get more steam going. Okay.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other comments from the commission on this presentation? All right, Shelley, Ned?
Yeah.
There were no public comments received.
Okay. Thank you, Shelley.
Okay. Just a few things. I'm going to let Ann take up the sequestration thing later, but I just want to give people a first hint to get down to the 300 parts per million or to stay within the 1.5 degrees centigrade rise. We would probably need to do carbon sequestration on about 50,000 acres of grassland. 50,000 acres. It's not a few trees here and there. It's or create 5 million metric tons of synthetic limestone out of CO2. So it's kind of on that order of things, but we're going to try to pin it down. And that'll decrease as we do the things that everyone else is working on right now. But and En-ROADS, I looked at that 3 years ago, so it's good to hear that coming up again.
We just went through an upgrade to be presented this week.
Okay, I'll shut up now. Thank you.
Commissioner Baker, were you offering comments as part of this presentation or as part of your commissioner comments? Okay, thank you. We'll move on then to commissioner comments. Just getting a raise of hands. Who would like to make commissioner comments this evening? Commissioner Peters? No? Commissioner Baker? Council member? All right. Commissioner Baker's most ready right now.
Throw that slide up.
And then we'll go Commissioner Peters and then the council member.
So the IPCC, we're talking a little bit about situations that ad hoc use, including numbers from the other ad hoc. What are targets? Anticipating that they're able to use emissions by 2030. And, you know, given that we also know we have these very large consumption emissions numbers, you know, we only need to do quite a lot of sequestration. So we're trying to understand, you know, their minds around how they do that process, you know, and also as a way to kind of, you know, ensure that we're all honest in mind, you know, how we tell people, you know, start looking at what is people not using, spending, you know, very pushes forward. So, yeah, so it's true that, you know, that the IPCC has said that we have a 67% chance of not receiving Celsius.
Sorry, Commissioner Baker, could you put your mic on? Thank you.
If we don't emit more than 420 gigatons of CO2 between 2018 and 2038, and essentially by analyzing the numbers, it's pretty clear that Petaluma's already used its share of those emissions, probably sometime less in 2021, you know. So essentially, you know, everything that we're emitting since 2021, we're already kind of over our budget to stay under 1.5, you know. And so essentially, we should really be amping up our sequestration efforts right now to try and catch up, you know, because you imagine, you know, with the emissions are going down, sequestration has to go up because that number, you know, we have to get to zero. So, yeah, I think there's just you know, Ned was just sharing some numbers, you know, but the initial estimate of the effort is that we need to sequester about 2 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent a year, you know, and so that's quite a lot. That's like half an inch of compost to 1.6 million acres annually for 30 years. So, you know, just on an order of magnitude, we really are still pretty far off from where we need to be. So anyway, our request to the other ad hocs, because we're in our Brown Act little silos, is if you guys could come up with some graphics or targets that show how your estimated decline in direct emissions by year. And so how are you trying to get to carbon neutrality by 2030 in your ad hoc? And then we can start to see, you know, okay, well, what does the sequestration number have to be? And you know, where our successes are. Because when we did the framework, we understood that we had to have measurable targets and that we had to have milestones. And we haven't really followed through on that. We're all waiting for the climate action and adaptation plan to help us with that task. But we thought it would be helpful if we could kind of make that request of the other ad hocs to bring forward some more specific information about where we think we should be going, and then the pace that we think is possible. Is there anything you want to add to that, Ned, or?
No, that's fine. I would help you. And I'll work with you, Ann, to help figure out sequestration needs. Once we know, you know, what the ramp down might look like, it doesn't have to hit zero in 2030. It's going to take longer for commercial buildings and so forth, and food processors. Anyway, we just get the data the best we can do, and then we'll figure out the sequestration component, which is a lot of talking to a lot of people about, how much compost, where we're going to get the compost, the kelp, the synthetic limestone, whatever is available now that we know about. And we'll know more as we go, but that's it. So we put two packages of numbers together.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? My understanding of the city's goal is that it is more specifically municipal operations being carbon neutral by 2030. And my understanding is the presentations have been focused on community emissions. And so perhaps that is a discussion we should take up or get clarity on as to what the city's actual goal is and if it is indeed municipal focused or community wide.
Over what the city controls. That would be city fleet, city facilities, but in terms of community, the city is always in partnership with the community because the city is part of the community. And if we're going to meet our 2030 goals, it's going to have to be a community-wide.
Was certainly the intent of the framework that it included the whole community. But I think your point is, the city has jurisdiction over what the city has jurisdiction over. So it really is a partnership effort.
It's not something that the city can do on its own. It's something that the city of Petaluma as a community will have to do together in partnership.
It is an underlying standard of the new general plan as well, right? That's one of the measuring sticks for the general plan? Is the 2030 neutrality goal? Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner Baker. Anything else? The comments? No? Okay. Commissioner Peters?
Yeah, I don't know what the format is for getting the regular email updates in there. And I do know there's an event, Ride and Drive EV, this Saturday at the Marin Civic Center. And they're doing another EV education campaign this summer. And so I would advocate that information about rideanddriveclean.org and their events going on this summer be disseminated out into the public.
Thank you, Commissioner Peters. Council member.
Okay, I just want to relay some information since I've been going to a few meetings this last month. I already talked a little bit about the budget meeting already, so I covered that part, that climate change is a major movement that's happening at the city level, and it definitely is going to take more than what this city itself can do, city staff can do, and what the city has management of, and it's going to take more than that, and even the larger community. And the sequestration part is probably the most difficult from the city perspective. We might be able to work with the trees, and I'm working with Relief on the tree part, native trees. However, it's going to be at the county level that we really need to work on and cooperate with at the agricultural lands, because I've been studying the agricultural sequestration possibilities, and that's actually the largest, best, most efficient carbon sequestration process possible, moving into but basically native grasses for our animal consumption and for our whatever fields that we have. So conversion to native grasses back, if we can, bunch grasses with combinations with the fungi that they have actually provides more carbon sequestration than anything else we could possibly do. And that's one thing we could probably do because that's outside our city limits for that acreage and land that we would need to do that type of thing. But inside our city, basically trees are our best option right now to doing that for sequestration part. But we have a lot more that we can do from the consumption in other areas. Just as what I've been reading on the 1.5 degrees is now the old target. Current thought now, what I've been reading is that we already passed the ability to get down to 1.5. We're now looking at 2 to 3 in the future because the world's not taking enough action as it is now. So that's one of the things I'm reading. That's what some of the scientists are starting to hint at, that we've already passed the 1.5 goal. We're not going to meet it. There's no way we can meet it at this point. We're not taking enough action. So we need to up our level if we need to meet our future goals of 2 or even 3 that's coming at us. Okay, but some positive things, just recently, just to give you some, we're trying to do a few things. River cleanup was pretty successful. I did my own little project at Schollenberger Park and brought some of my Petaluma Wetlands Alliance docents with me, and we cleaned up the river section by Schollenberger Park. A whole truckload of plastic came out. That was really good to feel that day. For Earth Day events, I did go to 2 schools and planted trees with the students. I even had at one school where the kindergarten, first graders, and second graders were there. They not only helped plant the trees, 2 trees, but they said poems to the trees and had a Native American Indian song and dance to the trees, welcoming the trees on their campus. So it is being integrated into our educational system. So that was a really wonderful day, Earth Day experience that I just had. I just wanted to share with everyone what a positive thing that was over there at Spring Hill School. Just last night at the Know Before You Grow seminar last night. I don't know if anybody else there listening in. Okay, the topic there was intelligent speed assistance. And that's where in Europe now, the new cars that are going to be manufactured 2 years from now are going to be required that if the car gets to the posted speed limit, and there's cameras on the car as well as the GPS and GIS systems within cars now, in Europe, in 2 years from now, all new cars are going to have required that as soon as that car reaches that limit that's posted, it will not go any faster. It will brake, warn you, you can, if it's emergency, you can bypass it for 15 seconds. You'll have the ability to bypass it before the car will slow down again in case you need an emergency speed of some sort. But basically, Europe's already moving in this direction and keeping down to the speed limit as a national. The whole European nations are moving in this direction. So that's the positive thing that, hey, this is what other countries are doing, and we're not even talking about it here as possibilities. So just putting speed governors and getting the speed down from the 70 and 80 miles an hour we're now seeing on the freeways that I experienced yesterday with someone who passed me at 90. And I'm going, cars are not efficient past 65. So 50 to 65 is for gasoline cars, and it's 20 to 30 miles an hour for electric cars for their maximum efficiencies. So getting the streets down and our speeds down entirely as we transform. And there's things that we might be able to do locally here to have our fleet, our future city fleet as an example, as a recommendation that maybe we could start with the new vehicles that we do purchase, EV vehicles, would maybe have these new systems, intelligent speed assistance added in at a pretty reasonable cost, which actually would change our insurance rates possibly because we'd have fewer accidents coming down the line and save lives. So there is just like seatbelts being mandated. This could be a possible mandate that could be applied because it's happening in other parts of the world. So that's this. I thought was just heard about it last night. I didn't realize there was this technology that's actually not only possible, it's already happening in other countries. So I want to make everyone aware of this possibility, and that's for transport. That's a huge thing, and we could do something. And I found out that Ventura is already doing it down there in Ventura in Southern California, and they already have excellent results from it and positive feedback from it. And if we start doing that, then if the city fleet does that, then people start joining in possibly, and it's changing behaviors. So that's just something we could possibly do. So I thought I'd just bring that up since that's a very new thing as of last night that I heard about. And let's see, but that's covered pretty much everything I wanted to cover. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember. Any other commissioner comments? Commissioner Hudson.
This is kind of small and random, but I am vice president of the environmental club I go to Petaluma High School, just down the road. And we are basically having an effort to create a green space on campus over the next couple of years. I believe we've been working with the relief coordinator for Relief Petaluma, and we're going to apply for a lot of grants, but we still need to fundraise. And so I just, as sort of like a liaison for that, I wanted to just let you guys know if there were any events, like we're planning on doing like recycling drives, plant sales, like just small sort of fundraising events in the future. So I just wanted to like give a heads up about that. I don't have like specifics right now, but yeah, just thought it'd be a good group to tell about that. So,
Great.
Thank you.
We look forward to future updates with locations and dates for that. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, Commissioner Orett.
Thank you. I've got one last thing, because this might be my last meeting with all of you. So what I wanted to do with Rihanna's help is share words from one of the most wonderful people I've met in all my work in environmental stuff. It's Wubbo Ockels, the first astronaut from the Netherlands. Met him when I was working with Amory Lovins. I got to the point where I wanted some advice, and I thought, I'll ask Wubbo. Here's what I found out he had waiting for me. Oh, speak up, Wubbo, we can't hear you. He taught engineering physics at Delft Technical University, and it was all about solar cars and solar, big kites to help cargo ships across the ocean. And it was a good friend of Amory Lovins, just a delightful person.
Okay, well, that's being worked on. I'll just do a little filler here. Two things I forgot to add. At water reuse, I've learned at the meetings that San Francisco Estuary Institute has proposals for Petaluma, has a couple of proposals, one of which is ecotone diking for saving our water treatment plant down the road here. So changing our diking systems, so that was being talked about at the water reuse. And even in the watershed folks, we're supporting various things, looking at water resiliency throughout the whole region. And their biggest concern right now is workforce sustainability. And that we don't have enough folks. We need to get down to the high schools and promote the trades because we're not getting enough applicants for our trades positions throughout the whole industry, in our water industry entirely at all. So we need to bump up our efforts to get the youth into our, and water reuse and water is very high on the list for resiliency.
Rihanna, if you can't get it, we can, we'll let people visit on their own if you want.
I just wanted to thank Ned for all your service on the commission. It's been wonderful working with you and brought a lot of great ideas and a lot of heart. A lot of passion.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you as well for your service, Ned. It's you've been here since the beginning. You've seen it all the way through. In that time, you experienced some real challenges, but we could always rely on you to be the conscience of this commission. And so, really appreciate your service. I think you'll be missed, not only by the commission members, but also by the community and your service on this commission. So, thank you for your time on the commission. Look forward to see your continuing work out in the community. All right, a couple updates I'd like to offer. One, on June 12th and 13th, the 14th Annual California Climate and Energy Forum is going to be held in Santa Rosa. It is kind of the preeminent local government climate conference in California every year, and it's going to be held right here in Sonoma County. That was June 13th and 14th, the California Climate and Energy Forum. 2 days of really all of the kind of like leading staff people and consultants who work on climate from a local government perspective will be there. So I thought folks should know about that. Last week, the state of New York became the first state in the country to adopt an all-electric standard for all new construction. So all new buildings after 2026 built in the state of New York will be all electric if it's under 7 stories, and by 2029, all buildings will be built all electric. And if those of you that follow clean energy, you know, usually those dates are pushed up on laws like that. So we'll probably continue to see more aggressive action by the state of New York on that. Closer to home, yesterday, the California Air Resources Board had a workshop to begin rulemaking on zero emission standards for heating and space heating and water heating equipment that they'll be adopting, that'll go into effect in 2030. And so we'll have zero emission standards for water heating and space heating in 2030, and that rulemaking was started yesterday. And then on Friday, the governor will release his May revise of the budget. And we're expected to see a large amount of money put forward for the Equitable Building Decarbonization Program, a direct install program for low-income households. It would cover complete electrification of low-income households. Last year, there was about $600 million in the budget for it. With the budget crisis this year, we expected cuts, but we're hearing that perhaps it's going to be spared from some of the cuts in the budget, and the guidelines were released just 2 weeks ago by the Energy Commission, so we could start to see program dollars roll out probably in Q4 or Q1 of next year. So those are brief updates. Like Commissioner Orrit, because we don't have a meeting next week, this will be my last meeting on the commission. It's been a great run with Commissioner Baker and Commissioner Orrit and others. It seems like a very long time ago that we started. It seems like a much more innocent time when we started on this commission. Right here in this room, we took a long hiatus from this room, spent a lot of time on Zoom together. But I think look back very fondly with some of the things we achieved on the commission. We became the first city to freeze the expansion of all fossil fuel infrastructure in the world here in Petaluma. The adoption of the 2030 target and the framework, I think, was put us really in the lead with other cities around the world about what we're trying to do on climate, and so many other things that we saw happen in Petaluma during our time on the commission. I'm sad that I'm going to miss the adoption of the Climate Action Plan, and I hope that those of you that remain on the commission make sure it continues Petaluma's leadership, and you push to make sure that it's an ambitious document that can be held up around California and around the country as the type of model that we should be and we claim to be And so I hope that our plan lives up to that, and I hope that you all take your role seriously in ensuring that it is. And lastly, I just hope that you push forward the role of the commission in city government. I think one of the things that we found is, as a brand new commission, is unsure what our mandate was. We had no precedent really, and so I hope that the remaining commission members really seek to clarify with the adoption of the plan what the role of the commission is in oversight of the city actions and implementation of the plan, and that you work with the city council and the city manager's staff to make sure that we have a strong role moving forward in implementation of not only the climate action plan, but also all climate activities and all activities that could affect the climate in the city. So it's been a pleasure serving with you all, and I look forward to working with you all in the community on climate activities and other activities as well. So thank you. And with that,
Oh, no, let us thank you. You know what? I think I assumed that you were going to stay on. You've been so amazing and brought so much information and steadfast energy and insight and deep thinking and, just practical experience. It's just been an incredible asset on this commission. And thank you so much.
Well, I second that too, Panama. You've been tremendous. Your leadership across the whole country is just really lifting things a whole powerful way. So it's been such a thrill to be on the same group with you. Thank you.
and in particular, I'd love to thank the city staff who has really supported us and supported me in this as well. So thank you, Shelley and Rihanna. It's been great working with you. Yep, and Patrick. And with that, it's a perfect segue to staff comments.
I'm really gonna miss you both. You were here to support me when I first began as the climate action manager for the city of Living, and I really looked to the original commission to help guide me and help me define my role, because my role was not defined when I first came on into this position. And it's really the end of an era. I'm gonna miss you both, but I anticipate that we will stay in touch and we'll continue to work together. And it will be the beginning of a new era moving forward. But thank you both. I appreciate you allowing me to respect this commission. And really could not have completed some of the work that I've done already. Like Zero Holland came directly from this commission. The envisioning of the EV master plan scope came from there. The Will Dam project was recommendations. And so my hope for the commission moving forward is to continue to feed me recommendations that I can follow and to hopefully implement. Okay, so I have some other updates. Commissioner Shreds, Councilman Shreds, to something that you've mentioned both to Peggy and then again here tonight. We are looking at installing telematics into our cars, and they will not have a stop system when cars go over the speed limit, but they will have monitoring systems for unsafe activities, and that's a first step. We are still evaluating products to see what is going to fit everyone's needs. We are hoping to, some of the aspects of our fleet are still old school. A lot of the work orders are still on paper. So we're trying to implement an entire fleet management system. I want to know exactly what it's like yet. I'm not sure, but as the climate action manager, I want telematics because that's going to help me track emissions on vehicles. I would like to invite commissioners and the public to attend the Recreation, Music, and Parks Commission meeting on May 17th. And that is because they will be discussing the artificial turf topic at that meeting. And so it's imperative that people show up and be there to discuss that topic. May 22nd, Cool Petaluma is partnering with the city of Petaluma and the Climate Ready campaign to host a resource expo. Zero Home will be at that expo providing demos. That will be at the Wakisi Center from 5 until 8, and it's a Monday night. The Sizer Cove contract recently has entered into the final stages. They completed their data gathering, and they've provided some data to staff, and we are starting to, we have a meeting next week, this is brand new, we just received it this week, to discuss the data, and the timing of it is perfect to go into the next stage. A notification came into my inbox about a consulting group called Prospect SV, which is Prospect Silicon Valley. They receive grant funding to provide free services to municipalities to help them synthesize data, like the data that we're getting from CyberCo, and to develop it into a strategy as next steps and how to move forward with that data, and to help identify funding opportunities to implement those strategies. And so we had the kickoff meeting for that today, and we provided them with the data, and they're going to start analyzing it. And I'm hoping that this partnership will work out, and that they will help us find funding to help implement building efficiency upgrades for our city facilities. I want to reiterate to everyone that the June meeting will be canceled, so please don't show up. Remember that it won't be happening. And that's the summary of that.
Thank you, Rihanna. And with that, we are adjourned.